Jeni Browne. Welcome to MFB News. I hope everybody is very, very well indeed. You have been capitalising on the sun when it was out. I went out and watched my son play cricket on Sunday and got burnt. My lily white skin had its first real exposure to the sun this weekend, and I paid the price afterwards. So I hope you're far more sensible in the sun than I am. Anyway, in terms of what we've got for you this week, loads of good stuff. I started writing the content for this video last night and I was thinking, gosh, I don't really think there's much to say. Actually, there's absolutely loads. So we're going to go through what's been happening with swap rates, then the pricing changes. We're going to be talking about what's happening with house prices. We're going to be talking about the Renters' Rights Bill, and we're also going to be talking about EPCs. And then finally, we're going to have a look at the Mortgage Works Regional Landlord Snapshot report, which tells you what landlords are up to by region. So lots of great stuff for you this week. Okay, so swap rates, and no great changes from last week. Could be good news, could be good news. It's a bad news story depending on where you sit on these kinds of things. So 2-year swaps as of last night were at 3.8, 1 month ago 3.59, and 1 year ago 4.6. 5-year swaps also at 4.82, so just a little bit higher than your 2 years now. 1 month ago 3.6, and 1 year ago just over 4. So as we found ourselves in the same position last week, month on month we're slightly worse off, but year on year we're in a much better position. So the kind of key thing here is that swap rates are around 0.2% higher than they were 1 month ago, and even a couple of weeks ago. Still we're ahead of the game year on year, which is great, but things have kind of increased, which is why we're seeing certain pricing changes, which I'll come on to in a moment. Now, in terms of the kind of outlook for swap rates, for now, I'm not expecting any great changes. I mean, obviously we've got Donald Trump doing crazy stuff in the US, playing sort of silly buggers with his tariffs, and so that's very unsettling for the markets. We've also got lots of talk about taxation changes coming up from our Labour government, so that's kind of got an eagle eye on there as well. Then we've got the problem with inflation, and it kind of goes on. So there's lots of stuff in the mix. So at the moment, just for the next few weeks at least, I'm not expecting any great changes in terms of swap rates. So if you are thinking that you need to take a fixed rate mortgage anytime soon, but you're waiting for base rate to come down in June, I'm hearing a lot of people say this to me at the moment. Realistically, I don't think we're going to see a base rate reduction in June. I think there's like a 20% chance of it happening now. And so swap rates, unless something really crazy happens and base rate comes down by 1/4 or 0.5%, which I really don't think is going to happen, we're not expecting to see any changes in swap rates anytime soon. Therefore, we're not expecting to see fixed rates move too much in the coming couple of weeks. Lender pricing changes in the last week, only a few actually, very, very quiet. I suspect a lot of lenders are just kind of waiting to see what happens with swaps, and hopefully see them come back down a bit, but also hoping they're not going to go up any further. So what have we seen? We've seen Santander increase their rates by 0.1%. NatWest have increased rates by up to 0.25%. The Leeds have brought out some new SPV rates, which are very similar to the ones they had, slightly cheaper. And Foundation Home Loans have introduced some new rates, which are slightly more edgy than the ones they had previously. So in the round, kind of 2 up, 2 down, kind of. I think we're going to continue to see sort of not a lot of changes unless swap rates kind of do something drastic over the next couple of weeks, as I mentioned. And I think probably, it's just going to be a case of watch this space in terms of what's going to be happening with lender pricing. As I mentioned in previous weeks, lenders' cost of funds has increased by 0.2%, so that does very much kind of indicate we might see further pricing increases over the next couple of weeks. There's also a strong possibility that some lenders are just kind of saying, actually, we can absorb this, let's just wait and see before we go and do any kind of reaction to the more recent increase in swap rates. Okay, quickie on the Renters' Rights Bill, an update of sorts. So last week, Parliament were in recess, which means they weren't doing any work, essentially. So it's gone really quiet on the Renters' Rights Bill. The important report stage has still not been scheduled, which means it's probably not going to get royal assent before the Parliament breaks up for the summer recess on the 22nd of July. So the odds are now very much on that any kind of, or the royal assent rather, is only going to be put in place in the autumn now. So for those of you who are kind of thinking about the timeline of the Renters' Rights Bill, I think that we can probably fairly comfortably assume that we're not going to see it essentially come into law until much later this year now. Now, we know EPCs are on the back of people's minds and green improvements to your buy-to-let properties. So topically, Paragon recently published a report this week, which is called Improving Standards and Sustainability in Privately Rented Properties. Don't say that after a couple of gin and tonics. Now, this is essentially a report which is kind of looking at essentially how people can kind of more improve their properties, make them more green, make them more sustainable. The report is available on the Paragon Bank website. You can go and access it. It's really, really interesting. But one of the things that it kind of highlighted that I found particularly kind of poignant is that almost 6 in 10 landlords, so 57% of you, have undertaken energy efficient upgrades to your properties, have not had your EPC assessments redone. So it might be that you've taken the property up from a D to a C, but you haven't actually got the report to demonstrate that. So that means that actually you could be missing out on certain benefits. So for example, if you're applying for a new mortgage, you could be getting a green rate, which might save you circa 0.1-0.15% on your interest rate. So it's worth knowing about that. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is that some lenders, not all, if you make EPC or green improvements to your property, they will actually give you some money in lieu of that. So an example of this would be fleet mortgages. So if you improve the EPC rating of your property by doing green improvements while you have a mortgage with fleet mortgages and you send them a new EPC report, that actually give you some money to kind of put you back in funds for the great work that you've done. So just something to be mindful of. So yes, like I say, if you are doing green improvements to your property and you think you might have pushed yourself up into a better EPC rating, it's definitely worth getting the property reassessed. There could be some real financial benefits in there for you. Okay, now quickie on the housing market, because Home Track have released one of their very good reports that they do on what's happening there. So the kind of key takeaways that you guys may just be interested in, they're reporting the strongest sales in May since 2021. So there are 13% more homes for sale. Now sales growth has turned positive again, so up by plus 6%, suggesting more demand for mortgages. Price inflation is low and stable at 1.6%. There's a clear south-north divide. The south is essentially been hindered by affordability issues, which we've talked about many times before. And Home Track are predicting low growth in prices at up to 2% a year and continued growth in sales agreed at 5% year on year. So I think what they're kind of saying, reading between the lines, that actually we've gone through a kind of fairly slow period of time in the property market. I mean, I mentioned in previous weeks, I'm thinking about, I'm trying to sell one of my buy-to-let properties. And it's just really, really quiet. But actually, perhaps the lower mortgage rates are starting to kind of churn up more interest from buyers. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, and the stamp duty holiday, which we had previously, which was fantastic, would have saved people, a fair amount of money, and not insignificant. We're talking about maybe a couple of £1,000s. But actually, if your mortgage rate is really, really high and you're taking a 5-year fixed rate, that's going to end up potentially costing you way more than a couple of £1,000s. Now, the difference is it's kind of the stamp duty is money you have to have up front, whereas the mortgage is kind of an ongoing payment and it's spread out. So it's a slightly different concern. But the key point here, I think, is that actually a lot of buyers have simply been saying, I just don't think I can afford this mortgage at those kinds of rates. I'm going to wait for things to come down. And obviously we've now seen things start to come down a bit. So potentially maybe it's opening the door for more people to start really thinking about getting in or making steps forward with a purchase. Likewise, there's a good choice of property for sale on the market. So actually, maybe we'll see things start to really move and open up. Okay, and then lastly this week, we're just going to have a quick look at the Mortgage Works' latest regional snapshot report, because it always makes really interesting reading. So to give you some context, the Mortgage Works have commissioned this report, and what happens is researchers go out to loads and loads of landlords and they ask them a series of questions, and then what they do is they give you a kind of overall for the UK set of data and they break it down by region. So I'm going to give you the overall figures, which kind of gives you an average, and I'm going to give you the kind of key kind of markers by region for different metrics. So first of all, of the landlords that responded, the average portfolio size was 7.4 properties. The average rental yield that was being achieved was 6.4%. In the last 12 months, 7% of landlords who responded had bought a property and 20% had sold a property. 29% had had rental arrear and 40% had experienced a void period. Now, in terms of their confidence for the future, 37% were feeling confident about their own letting business, 38% were feeling confident about rental yields, 17% were feeling good about the prospect of the capital gains on their property, and just 3% were feeling good about the UK economy, which is slightly concerning, isn't it? That's a very low figure. So in terms of by region now, so what's going on? And I'm just going to give you the kind of sort of top performers as it were. So the largest portfolio size on average is equal between the East Midlands and the North East, which is both at 12.2 properties. So landlords based in East Midlands and North East have the largest portfolios on average at 12.2 properties. The highest rental yield being achieved by respondents is in the Northwest at 7.1%. The largest percentage of landlords buying is in the Northeast at 18%. So 18% of landlords in the Northeast are growing their portfolios. But the largest percentage of landlords divesting or selling properties is in the Northeast, with 30% of landlords selling at least one property in the last 12 months. The highest percentage of landlords experiencing rent arrears is in the Northeast at 47%. I mean, that's absolutely huge, isn't it? The highest percentage of landlords with void periods is in the Northeast at 53%. And in terms of positivity and feeling good about landlording, and this is a word that I've created and I'm owning it. So this is taking into account people's feeling good about letting business, rental yields, capital gains and the UK economy is the South East, which is fantastic news because that's where I'm based. Least positive landlords were in the Yorkshire and Humber and also Wales. So there you go, a little kind of overview about what your landlord friends are up to in terms of selling and buying and yields and all that kind of stuff, but also how good they're feeling. Interesting stuff if you're thinking about buying a property in a different part of the country to yourself. And that's us wrapping it up again for yet another week. They are rattling by. It's going to be Christmas soon. I've just said the word, haven't I? Sorry. In May. Probably a bit early. Anyway, look, if you have any questions, do give us a call. 0345 345 6788. We would love to speak to you. And as always, there is an absolute smorgasbord of information available on our website. Have an amazing week. Hope the sun comes out for us again, and I'll see you next time.